said, you have a lot to learn about editing. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it says like, he's going to eat the sandwich. You're not going to eat the sandwich. They're just talking about a sandwich.
The best scene in the movie.
He says, cut and just get to the story. And I said, that is the story. And what I meant in a sense is I am telling a story, but I don't want the story to just be the main up front on it. We will follow the story through this kind of seemingly meaningless conversations. But that's what we do. We don't express ourselves in such an articulate fashion. It's always sideways. If you happen to be in love with somebody and you don't know how to talk to them about it, you don't just come right out and say it. It's you're going left and right and whatever. You're never direct about it. And that's human behavior. But you can tell the story through that. And that's what I thought Diner was. So there is a story, multiple stories, but I try to hide it with these conversations. But it tells you how close they are to one another.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing about that. I guess that the network executive was thinking in terms of one through line, which in that movie, it's sort of an umbrella. The sort of the pending marriage just becomes this umbrella for several different stories about characters.
Yeah.
But they
all have their multiple stories to it, but it's hidden in that way.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's sort of like American Graffiti in that way, and kind of, right? Like
yes.
I never thought about it until you were just talking about it. That what is the story of that other than an evening before some kid goes to college?
Yes, no, and that's important. As opposed to that's important. That's why people connect. You make that connection. What's so fascinating about influences that you don't understand. You don't always understand what influences you in your life. And it wasn't until much later in life that I realized that Patty Chayefsky and Marty was probably the most influential moment when I was a kid and I was watching Marty on television.
Wait, what do you want to do, Marty?
What do you want to do, Marty? I don't know, Angie. What do you want to do? Right? I thought that was literally the greatest thing I'd ever heard in my life. And I was a little kid, and I'd always walk around, in the house with my mother and father and say, what do you want to do tonight, Marty? I don't know. What do you want to do, Angie? What are you talking about? And I would do it all the time because I found it so fascinating to me. Right? Now, I didn't make any sense out of it at the time.
But it was human.
It was human, and that's what Diner ultimately was. It was that. And that was what I extracted from Chayefsky's work.
It felt like real life to you.
Yeah.
Like this is how people talk.
That's life. And so there are these little influences that we're never smart enough to go, oh, you know what? I'm really influenced by, some things just get in your head and years later you may make sense out of it. And I think that's what makes it exciting in terms of what we're able to do in writing and directing and et cetera.
Well, it's interesting because it seems like Chayefsky, it seems like there was that you were kind of similar in a way with some of the movies, weren't you? I mean,
a little bit. And if I were to think about it,
I mean, Network. I mean, if you really think about Network and some of the movies, the satires you did around television, do you know?
Yeah.
Wag the Dog, Jimmy Hollywood, Man of the Year. I mean, thematically, it's similar.
It's in the ballpark.
Right.
I mean, he was truly. I mean, I would think of him as a truly brilliant writer, and I would only be in the margins of that. But I do believe, yes, that it's like, look, if you're taking about the breakup of an American family, in a sense, in Avalon, was like you cut the turkey without me, we leave, right? That it wasn't just the turkey; it was the whole shift that was taking place. It was the change of the breakup of the family structure, all these things, and it comes out that way rather than this articulate version of two brothers. It's that in a sense was the breaking point, and as crazy as it is, it has its value rather than being so articulate and expressing ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Right. As opposed to sort of, the story points are sublimated in the characters, whereas you're not just sort of like, here's your act break. This is the point of this.
Yeah.
It kind of sneaks up on you.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like even in Rain Man, where that movie's really about a type of personality that kind of was prominent in the 80s, that type of ambition and selfishness and the drive of the Tom Cruise's character that it disabled his ability to be empathetic to the struggles of his brother who he didn't know, and that he really is able to come back around and find his heart and his purpose through this brother and find out what's important in life, relative to sort of, it really becomes almost about like, aspiring to be a Gordon Gekko type of character or really engaging in empathy and family and caring and understanding humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all in there. And then you just have to put that all aside and you're just involved within
the story.
And that, but that's 100%. That's the case.
Yeah. And I mean, I just I don't know how conscious you are of that in terms of, creating these things that do, represent a time or like, even Diner was a generational thing.
Exactly. I mean, that's why there's a line that Kevin Bacon has very early on in terms of things that are beyond what they have been around is Kevin Bacon sees the girl on the horse and said, you ever think there's something going on that we don't know about? You know what I mean? It's like
right.
A girl and a horse and a whatever, and it's, beautiful or whatever. There's something else out there.
Yeah, and his character is, slightly more nihilistic than the other ones for whatever reason. Yeah, and I just remember all that because I remember seeing that and, becoming fascinated with Reiser because it was at that time after you introduced me to Reiser. And I went to the comic strip in New York, and I wanted to do comedy. And I remember because I knew Reiser from Diner, and I saw him at the comic strip that night, I approached him to ask him how to start doing comedy. And it was
really?
Because, he was just sitting there at the strip, and I think I must have been in college. I don't remember when it was, but I asked him if I could sit with him for a minute and talk to him. He said, all right. And I said, well, how do you do comedy? How do you start doing comedy as a living? And he literally just said, I don't know. You just got to do it. And I'm like, all right, that was it. That was the big moment.
That was it.
That's all I got out of Paul, at that moment. But it seems to me that over the course of your career that, there are these human stories, and I guess they're all human to a degree, but you certainly, you didn't, tether yourself to any one form. You've done every kind of fucking movie. I mean, I watched The Natural a lot. I would say out of all your movies, I watch that one the most. I don't know why, but I tend to, I'll watch it on purpose more than other ones because, it's just the look of it and the feel of it and the heroic tale. And there's just something like the reason I will go back to it is just the complete insanity of that Barbara Hershey character. Like if you do anything that's recognized, if you in any way, that woman's around. And it's just a terrifying thing, man. It's and I don't know what it is.
You know what's amazing? In some ways, it's like luck as well. The idea that Redford ultimately had because we had met and we were talking about baseball, and he said, I got this script around here somewhere, and he pulls it out, and it was A Natural. He says, take a look at this, see what you think. And I read it, I called him, I said, gee, I think this is great. I didn't really know him well, I just met him. And he said, yeah, okay, good. And we ended up, doing that film. Now, when I think back on it, here's this actor, this giant actor who also won an Academy Award as Best Director. And he ends up saying, yeah, you should direct this film.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's such a leap of faith on his behalf.
I guess so. Yeah, you're pretty early on. You've only done a couple movies that you directed.
One movie.
One. Oh, that was it.
That was it. Diner, and then there's The Natural. Yeah.
but the choice is in that, because, like, you know, if I read it, like, it's one of those things where, you know, like when I was in college studying film, I never really understood semiotics or the language of, you know, that's a mythological story that, like, as a film to study, you know, it's almost a Homeric story, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I guess it's that way in the book, but it's interesting to me to know that the book ends with him striking out. And and, like, you know, like and you, second movie in, you're given this script, and the, you know, Bernard Malamud, the hero strikes out. There's no fucking way you could do that, right?
No, yeah.
Like, I mean, did that ever come up?
It, you know, one day when we were cutting the film, and you know, he swings and misses, you know, in that, and I said to the editor, why don't we, like, send this to the studio? Just, you're strike three, you're out. But we just put that in there, and it goes to black, and just send it to the studio. Can you imagine everybody have a heart attack? You know what I mean? And you couldn't do it. But, you know, there were all these changes along the way. The one thing that, and I wish I would have known this at the time, and I only heard about it later on, is that Malamud, who wrote this very American, you know, piece, but it didn't sell well in its time. It wasn't a giant bestseller. And he went to, supposedly, as I remember, it was a long time ago now, with his daughter, and they went to see The Natural. And he came out, and she said, "So, Dad, what do you think?" And he said, "Finally, I'm an American writer."
Really?
And I thought, my God, I wish I would have known that, you know, at the time. I mean, so, you know, he was able to enjoy it, even though we have to make these kinds of changes within it.
Yeah.
But initially, the critics never could get over that. Well, that he didn't just strike out, you know, because it was like, well, no, in the book he strikes out. You know,
so they rode you for that.
They were not happy about that. That the film was attacked because he hit a home run and he didn't strike out to end the movie.
Apparently, they just can't quite understand the Jews' legacy in Hollywood. We are here to create America and make it happy.
Yes.
you guys wouldn't accept us on any level until we made these dreams for you. See, the guy wins in the end.
Yes.
And it made Bernard feel American finally. He realized, like, maybe I don't have to be depressed. You know, maybe there's hope. That's too much, man. So you stayed pretty close with Robin the whole time, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was such a shock, you know, it was such a shock, and it's one of those things when you suddenly, you know, you got to get a phone call and say, you know, Robin, you know, committed suicide. I mean, it was like devastating. It's hard to even talk about it, because it's somehow you couldn't even envision anything like that, you know?
Yeah.
He was such a great character, you know, and in some ways, you know, he had such a great empathy for people as well. You know, I mean, he was really had that a childlike fascination, you know, for a number of things and people and everything else. And so when I got that phone call, I was like, well, you don't know, you can't even describe it.
Yeah. I mean, because I think, like, it seems that Good Morning Vietnam really was the beginning, in a way, of you know, him in terms of feature films, that was the thing that it was perfect for him.
Yeah.
And you kind of, you knew that.
You knew it, and we worked on it to get that, because I thought that was the key thing to it. You know, even though the radio stuff is only 12 minutes of the movie. You know, it's something like that. It
was an exciting balance, because, you know, he had done, I think, a few movies before that where he tried to just be a serious actor, but to incorporate that side of him effectively in a way that wasn't just eating scenery, but had a purpose, and then to sort of counterbalance it with his empathy.